Here's a question. What actually happens when someone uses the option you sold them? Do your shares disappear? Does money show up? And do you get any warning first? Remember the promise from our earlier lessons. The buyer paid for the right to buy something at a set price. When the buyer decides to use that right, it's called exercising the option. When the seller is required to keep the promise, it's called being assigned. Exercise is what happens to the buyer. Assignment is what happens to the seller. They are two sides of the same event. Let's go back to the sneakers. You own a pair worth $200. You agree to sell them for $225 anytime before the agreement ends. The buyer pays you $10 for that promise. Later, the sneakers become worth $240. The buyer can now use the option. They pay you $225, you deliver the sneakers, and you still keep the $10 premium. Was that a bad outcome for the seller? Not necessarily. You sold sneakers that started at $200 for $225, and you collected another $10 up front. But there was a trade-off. The sneakers were worth $240 when you sold them. You gave up that last $15 of upside because you had already promised a lower selling price. The promise paid you, but it also limited how much you could gain. Now, replace the sneakers with shares of stock. One standard stock option contract usually represents 100 shares. So, if you sell one covered call, you normally need to own 100 shares. If you are assigned, those shares are sold at the strike price, the price you agreed to. That sounds complicated, but the result is simple. Your shares leave, cash from the sale arrives, and the premium you received is still yours. Here is one detail worth knowing. Assignment can happen before the option reaches its expiration date. The buyer owns the right to use the option, and sometimes they may choose to use it early. That means you should not sell a covered call unless you are truly willing to sell the shares at the strike price. Not just on the final day, anytime while the contract is active. Near expiration, think about three simple possibilities. If the stock price is above the strike price, you should expect that your shares may be sold. If the stock price is below the strike price, the option will usually end without being used. If the two prices are very close, the outcome can be less obvious. That is a good time to check your position instead of making assumptions. So, what happens when an option is exercised? The buyer uses the right they paid for. The seller is assigned and fulfills the promise. With one covered call, that usually means 100 shares are sold at the strike price. The seller receives the cash and keeps the premium. Assignment is not a malfunction. It is the contract working exactly as designed. Next lesson, what happens when an option expires without being exercised? Want to learn more? Check the description below for trusted resources on today's topic.